Welcome. You've arrived at a quiet place where the day can gently slip away and the noise of the world grows soft and distant. If you're here to unwind, to rest, or perhaps to fall asleep, you're in good company. Tonight, we'll journey through one of the oldest and most enduring stories ever told. Not a single tale, but a vast collection of myths whispered through generations. A time when everything and nothing was wrapped in a silence deeper than night. Imagine yourself there, floating at the edge of the beginning, where the very first story quietly begins. These are the stories the ancient Greeks told themselves to make sense of stars and storms, of death and love, of dreams and destiny. But this won't be a lecture. There is no need to remember names or follow every twist. Let the rhythm of the past carry you. Let the myths unfold like a slow tide, calm, unhurried, and just mysterious enough to let your thoughts wander. You may drift in and out of the words. That's perfectly fine, because this is history, told slowly, softly, and meant to be slept through. We'll begin not with mortals or kings, but with the cosmos itself. Before time, before light, before even the gods. In the beginning, there was no sun, no moon, no sky, and no sea. There was only chaos. Not chaos in the way we often imagine. Not noise or confusion, but something far more ancient and still. Among them were the Titans, immense, powerful beings with dominion over nature, time, and memory. There were also the Cyclopes, who forged thunder and flame, and the Hecatoncheires, beings with 100 hands and 50 heads, who seemed less like creatures and more like ancient forces given shape. But Uranus, despite being vast and celestial, was uneasy. He feared his own children. And so, one by one, he locked them away deep within Gaia, burying them in the earth. Not with hate, but with dread. It was the great void, vast and shapeless, a silent womb of potential. From this quiet emptiness, the first presences emerged. Not suddenly, but as if rising slowly from deep water. Gaia, the earth, was one of the first. She was solid, wide, and patient, a living landscape of hills, valleys, rivers, and stone. She was not born, not built, but simply ... was. Soon came Uranus, the sky, stretching above her like a blanket of stars. Together, earth and sky embraced, and in their union, the world began to take form. From their bond came many children, some gentle, some strange, and some that would one day shape the fate of gods and men. Gaia, feeling every shift and stir within her, grew heavy with sorrow. She loved her children and could not bear their confinement. And so, From the deep places of her being, she hatched a quiet plan. She shaped a sickle out of unbreakable stone and approached her son Cronus, youngest of the Titans, clever and just brave enough. She asked him to rise against Uranus, to free his siblings and break the cycle of fear. Cronus listened. When night fell and Uranus lowered himself over the earth, Cronus stepped forward with the sickle. What followed was not a battle, not a roar, but a single, fateful act that changed the balance of the cosmos. These children were not titans. They were something different, sharper, smaller, and destined for greatness. Their names were Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. And so, each time Rhea gave birth, Cronus swallowed the child whole. Not out of cruelty, but out of cold, steady fear. The same fear that echoes through every generation that tries too hard to keep control. Uranus was overthrown, not destroyed, but undone. The stars dimmed for a moment. The sky pulled back, and Cronus took the throne of the world. He had inherited the fear of losing it. For a time, all was still. Cronus ruled with seeming peace, and with his sister Rhea, he brought forth a new generation. He remembered the fall of his father and believed a prophecy that one of his own children would one day do the same to him. In the stillness of that distant cave, the wheel of fate turned once more, silently but certainly. Rhea, watching her children vanish one by one, grew weary of the silence and sorrow. When her sixth child was born, a boy named Zeus, she could no longer endure it. She wrapped a stone in cloth and handed it to Cronus in place of the infant. Cronus swallowed it without question. The real child was hidden away on the island of Crete, where nymphs sang lullabies, and a magical goat nursed him beneath swaying trees. The drums of the caretakers beat softly to mask his cries from the ears of the world. There, in quiet safety, the child grew. And so began a new ripple in the great current of myth, the birth of the one who would rise against Cronus, just as Cronus had risen against Uranus before him. The rhythm of their lives, of Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and now Zeus, was not fast, not violent, but steady. One age giving way to the next. One generation rising as another falls. And all of it began not with thunder or fire, but with the quiet, patient unfolding of story. From chaos into shape, the world turns even in myth. And while Cronus sat on his silent throne, believing he had outwitted fate, time itself, that slow and unyielding tide, continued to move forward, hidden away in the folds of the earth, in the green, sun-dappled cradles of Crete. A child was growing. His name was Zeus, and though he was born to overthrow a titan in the beginning, he was only a boy, small curious, and unaware of the weight of destiny resting quietly on his shoulders. But the last hope of a world waiting for breath, guided by Metis, a Titaness known for her wisdom and quiet counsel, Zeus began to understand what must be done. Metis was not a fighter, but she saw clearly, and she taught Zeus not to fight with rage, but with strategy. The war to come would not be won by brute strength alone. His caretakers were not warriors or kings. They were nymphs, gentle spirits of the natural world, beings of stream and stone, moss and wind. They raised him not with prophecy, but with patience. They fed him milk from Amalthea, a divine goat whose horns flowed with abundance, and they soothed him with lullabies whispered through pine needles. His childhood was one of stillness, of learning, of quiet watching, the kind of childhood that teaches not dominance, but observation. And as he grew, the world outside him changed. The rule of Cronus, while firm, was not without tension. The Titans ruled not only the sky, but also memory, time, and ocean. They were powerful, but proud. And like all who hold power for too long, they became wary of change. Cronus, ever watchful, began to feel shadows gathering in the corners of his reign. Though he had swallowed 5 of his children, he could not swallow the whispers of time. Meanwhile, Zeus, now no longer a child, began to learn who he truly was. Not just a hidden son, not just a secret. Before he could challenge Cronus, Zeus would need to set his siblings free. It is said that he tricked Cronus into drinking a potion, perhaps one laced with the essence of earth and sky, perhaps simply a bitter blend of destiny and will. Whatever the means, the result was this: Cronus convulsed, and from his mouth came the children he had once consumed: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, whole and grown, as if time itself had protected them. Now reunited, the 6 children of Cronus stood together for the first time, not as victims, but as a new force in the world. But the Titans would not step aside easily. The war that followed, the Titanomachy, would last for 10 long years. A war not of blood and fire, but of grinding endurance and deep divides. Zeus, in his growing wisdom, freed the Cyclopes from their prison, the same one where Uranus had once banished them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes gave Zeus 3 gifts: thunder, lightning, and the thunderbolt, weapons not of metal, but of storm and sky. To Poseidon, they gave a great trident, able to stir the oceans with a single strike, and to Hades, a helmet of invisibility, which allowed him to move unseen through shadow and stone. On the other, the Titans, ancient and immovable. The battlegrounds were not cities or castles. They were mountain tops and caves, the open sky and the deepest trenches of the sea. Imagine it, great winds circling above Mount Olympus, clouds thick with the charge of lightning and thunder. Below, stone-faced titans rising like cliffs from the earth, their eyes steady and unreadable. Neither side gave ground easily. But the Olympians were not alone. With these gifts, the tide began to turn. Zeus hurled bolts of lightning with such force that the mountains shook. Poseidon struck the ground, sending tremors through the sea and land alike. 10 years passed like a breath drawn deep and slow. They were defeated, not destroyed, but cast down. One by one, they were sent into the depths of Tartarus, a realm even deeper than Hades' domain. There, behind gates of bronze, guarded by the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones who now stood with Zeus, the Titans remained, held not by cruelty, but by necessity. Their time had passed, and then, finally, it ended, and Hades, invisible among the ranks of the Titans, sowed confusion and silence, striking when least expected. The rhythm of the world changed. It was no longer governed by stillness and endurance. 12 thrones, carved of stone and thought, stood in a great hall open to the sky. On these thrones sat the Olympians. Zeus at the center, with Hera, his sister and future queen, beside him. Poseidon, god of the sea, and Hades, ruler of the underworld, took their dominions. Demeter tended to the earth and its harvests, Hestia the hearth, and others, too, would come. Athena, born from thought, Apollo radiant with music and sun. Artemis, quiet as the moon, Ares, sharp with war, his cestus steady with fire and craft. And Aphrodite, whose arrival was as mysterious as it was beautiful. Others suggest he fled, disappearing beyond the edges of the world, swallowed by time, just as he once tried to swallow it himself. They were divine, yes, but they were also terribly human, but by motion, by wind and waves, by flashes in the sky and the echo of unseen footsteps. The war continued, long and wearying. The Titans, mighty though they were, could no longer hold their ground. Cronus himself, broken and silent, was unseated. Some myths say he was imprisoned with the others. And so the world changed. The sky cleared, the seas calmed, and atop the mist-wrapped summit of Mount Olympus, the new gods took their place. But these gods were not distant. They were not abstract. They quarreled, loved, envied, forgave. Zeus ruled not with cruelty, but with weight. His presence was like weather, always there, sometimes warm, sometimes thunderous. He watched from his throne, a crown of lightning above his brow, holding the balance between order and chaos. Hera, His queen was regal and proud, often misunderstood, but never without strength. Poseidon retreated often to his seas, where the waves followed his moods. Calm when pleased, storming when slighted. But this victory was not the end of the story, only the beginning of a new kind of world. One where power was not only held, but tested, of sea foam curling at the edges of a quiet shore, of the steady rhythm of stories passed from breath to breath, where even gods rise, fall, and rise again, where myths grew not only from gods, but from mortals, from heroes, from quests, from choices. Hades withdrew even farther into the realm of the dead, where he ruled not as a villain. A new age had begun, one of brightness, of complexity, of gods who loved and lost and listened, the age of Olympus. But as a custodian, watching over the quiet dead with solemn respect, the Olympians shaped the world, not by creating it, but by living in it. They became part of its seasons, its tides, its tempests and dawns, and the humans who lived below, in valleys and islands, saw their reflections in the gods above. They prayed not because the gods were perfect, but because they were familiar. They built temples not to honor unreachable ideals, but to mark the spaces where the divine and the mortal might meet. Zeus had overthrown Cronus. The Olympians had cast down the Titans, and so the mountains stood, wrapped in clouds, watching the world below. If you find yourself drifting now, let it be with a thought of thunder sleeping in the clouds. Now that the dust of war has settled, the sky, the sea, and the earth breathe a little more freely. The Titans have receded into memory, and the Olympians have taken their place, not as distant creators, but as living presences, each woven into the very texture of the world. Their home, Mount Olympus, stands high above the realm of men, cloaked in drifting clouds and touched by light that does not belong to any hour of the day. There, beyond the reach of mortal footsteps, the gods gather. They eat, they debate, they fall silent, but they are never still. The mountain is not a fortress, it is a rhythm, the breath of divinity always rising and falling, just like the human lives it watches over. But beneath that lies something quieter, a deep, dignified sorrow that comes from seeing too much, remembering too long. Hera governs marriage, fidelity, and the hidden strength that binds households together. She does not forgive easily, but she protects fiercely. Her eyes do not wander, but they do not blink either. When mortals call to her, it is often not for power, but for endurance, for the ability to remain when leaving would be easier. Let us walk slowly, step by step, through this divine household, not to disturb it, but to better understand it. To know the gods is to know the nature of the world itself, perhaps something about ourselves. We begin with Zeus, the king of the gods. Zeus governs the heavens, but he also governs law, fate, and the delicate balance that holds everything in place. His symbol is the thunderbolt, swift, bright, and final. But he does not use it carelessly. He is judgmental, yes, but also deeply patient. He listens before he acts. He weighs before he strikes. And though his rule is not without flaws, it is consistent. He is not loved by all, but he is respected, even feared, as all powerful things are. His presence is not simply one of authority, but of vastness, like the open sky on a summer afternoon, when the wind quiets and you sense the air has become aware of itself. By his side sits Hera, his queen. She is often remembered as proud, sometimes even vengeful. From the sky, we descend into the sea, to the domain of Poseidon, brother to Zeus and lord of the oceans. He is not gentle, but he is not cruel. He is movement. Waves that churn without reason, tides that rise with the moon, but fall at their own will. His trident is both a tool and a warning. He governs not only the sea, but horses and earthquakes, forces that cannot be tamed, only respected. Sailors whisper to him, not expecting mercy, but hoping for restraint. He can be quiet, almost unseen, for weeks or months, and then roar without warning, sweeping ships away like toys. Poseidon reminds us that some powers will never answer to us. We must learn to read them, not command them. And then, below the sea, beneath the crust of the earth, in a place where roots forget the sun, sits Hades. He does not live among the living. His kingdom is the underworld, not a place of fire, but of shadows and stillness. Here, souls wander quietly, unjudged, guided gently to their resting places. Hades is not evil. He is duty. He is inevitability. He does not seek worship, but he does not forget the names of those who come to him. He wears a helm that makes him invisible, not because he is hiding, but because his work is not for the eyes of the living. To call on Hades is not to beg for life, but to ask that death be dignified and perhaps delayed. From these great siblings came a wider circle, children of the new age, each carrying a fragment of their parents' domains, but shaped by newer questions. Consider Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, but never of chaos. She was not born in the usual way. She sprang fully formed from the forehead of Zeus after he swallowed her mother. Metis, the tightness of thought. Imagine that, a goddess born from intellect, not pain. She carries a spear and a shield, but never without cause. Athena stands for strategy, reason, and justice. Cities built temples to her, not out of fear, but out of admiration. Her owl is not a pet, but a mirror, silent, watchful, and sharply aware of what others miss. Now, picture the brightness of day, the warmth of sunlight that catches in golden hair and dances across the surface of water. This is Apollo, god of the sun, of music, poetry, healing, and prophecy. He is beauty made into motion, not soft, but precise. His music does not soothe so much as awaken. His arrows strike true, not only in battle, but in truth. Oracles speak with his voice, and when his chariot draws the sun across the sky, the world remembers to bloom again. But Apollo also brings plague when ignored. Like all things radiant, he must be handled with care. His twin, Artemis, rules the moon and the wild, goddess of the hunt, protector of young women, an eternal maiden. Where Apollo is warmth, Artemis is cool stillness. A silver figure slipping between trees, her feet soundless on moss. She asks for little and gives even less. But if you find yourself alone in a forest at dusk and sense a quiet presence just beyond view, it might be her watching. She belongs to no one, and for that she is feared and revered in equal measure. And then there is Ares, the god of war. Not war as strategy that belongs to Athena, but war as fire, as passion, as blood that moves too quickly through the body. Ares is the cry before the charge, the trembling stillness after the strike. He is not wise, but he is not stupid. He is fury personified. Soldiers called to him not because he would protect them, but because he understood them. He never built cities. He never planted crops. But he walked beside those who fought, whether for glory or simply to survive. By contrast, Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge, built quietly what others destroyed. He was born with twisted limbs, cast from Olympus by his own mother, Hera. But he found a home beneath the mountain, among flame and molten ore. There he shaped the tools of gods, the armor of Achilles, the chains of throne of Zeus himself. His hands, rough and burned, made beauty from pain. And though he limped, he never stopped creating. Hephaestus reminds us that not all power is loud. Some of it glows softly, deep underground, waiting to be shaped. And what of Hermes, the messenger, the god of travelers, thieves, boundaries, and language? He moves easily between worlds, from Olympus to earth, from the living to the dead. He wears winged sandals and a crooked smile. He carries the caduceus, a staff of twin serpents, one for truth, one for deception. Hermes does not build temples, but he visits them all. He speaks every language, knows every road. To call on Hermes is to ask for movement, of thought, of feet, of fate itself. Among all these forces of wisdom, war, craft, and speech, there is also desire. For that, the Greeks had Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, but not merely physical. She was born not of womb, but of foam, rising from the sea near Cyprus after Uranus's fall. She is not just attraction, she is tension, longing, the ache of beauty that cannot be possessed. She can be cruel, indifferent, or overwhelmingly generous. She makes mortals fall in love with the impossible. She is the thread that tugs between eyes across a room. To resist her is to pretend not to be human. And so the Olympian pantheon forms a circle, not closed, but turning, a constellation of forces, law and love, rage and reason, death and renewal. They quarrel, they betray, they forgive, they shape the world, and they reflect it. To the Greeks, these gods were not abstract ideals. They were neighbors, sometimes allies, sometimes dangers. People left offerings, not just for favor, but to acknowledge the presence of something larger, something that watched and listened, and sometimes intervened. You might pray to Demeter when planting grain, to Artemis when giving birth, to Hermes when traveling far from home. You might curse Ares in the middle of battle, and then thank Apollo when the fever breaks. There was a god for every season, every fear, every celebration. The divine did not reside above the world, it pulsed within it. And when storms came, or the moon seemed too bright, or love struck too hard, the Greeks did not ask why. They asked, which god is near? So as you lie there now, listening to the slow unfolding of old stories, let the names drift like stars across the night sky. Let them settle where they will. You don't need to hold them, only to notice them, as one might notice the sound of rain on distant hills, or the changing shape of clouds. There is no test at the end, only sleep, and perhaps a dream in which you walk slowly through a temple, the air thick with incense, the stone warm beneath your feet, and just beyond the columns, a god waits, not to judge, but to simply see you. The gods reigned from their misty mountain. They quarreled, shaped the seasons, and watched the world like stars, observing a quiet field below. But they did not live alone. Beneath Olympus, in the valleys, forests, islands, and shadowed corners of the ancient world, lived mortals, fragile, flawed, and astonishingly bold. The stories of these mortals, though touched by divine favor or cursed by divine pride, belonged to the earth. Their steps fell on stone roads, their hands reached for fire, their fates curled slowly like smoke into legend. They were not gods, and yet the gods often watched them with deep fascination, amused, enraged, even moved. These were the heroes, not because they were perfect, but because they walked willingly into the unknown. Let us begin, not with a man, but with a titan who defied the very order of Olympus, Prometheus. Prometheus was not a hero in the way we think of swords or monsters. He was a giver, a thinker, a quiet rebel who saw something in humanity worth saving. When Zeus created mankind, he made them weak, without claws or fur, vulnerable to cold and fear. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, watched these trembling figures and pitied them. And so, he stole fire from the sacred forge of Hephaestus, or perhaps from the sun itself. He brought fire, not just warmth and light, but knowledge, invention, hope. Fire allowed humans to cook, to craft, to survive. It was a divine gift offered without permission. As punishment, Prometheus was chained to a high, lonely mountain. Each day, an eagle symbol of Zeus came to feast upon his liver. Each night, it regrew, and the pain began again. But Prometheus did not scream. He endured, not in silence, but in dignity. In some versions, he is eventually freed, but in all, he remains a symbol of the price of compassion and the stubbornness of hope. Not long after this, in the age when gods still walked among men, came the creation of Pandora. The gods, ever clever, decided to create a woman, radiant and perfect in form. Each deity gave her a gift: beauty, charm, music, persuasion, and curiosity. She was sent to humanity with a jar, not a box, despite how the story has been retold, and warned never to open it. But of course, warnings have their own gravity. Pandora opened the jar, and from it poured all the miseries of human life: sickness, jealousy, famine, sorrow. The air turned heavy, the earth darker. But as she rushed to close it, one thing remained inside. Something light, fluttering, almost forgotten. Hope. Even in myths of loss, the Greeks tucked away something gentle. Now let us walk with a warrior. His name was Perseus, and his tale begins with fear. An oracle had once told King Acrisius of Argos that he would be killed by his grandson. So the king locked his daughter, Dano, in a bronze chamber, hidden from all men. But gods do not heed walls. Zeus visited her in the form of golden light, and soon a child was born. Perseus, the king, unable to kill the boy outright, placed mother and child in a chest and cast them into the sea. They survived, and Perseus grew strong. When a boastful king demanded a gift from Perseus, the head of Medusa, a gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, the boy accepted, not for glory, but because he was cornered. The task seemed impossible, but the gods watched. Hermes gave him winged sandals. Athena offered a polished shield. Hades lent his helmet of invisibility. Armed with gifts and guided by wisdom, Perseus approached Medusa, not with brute force, but with reflection. Using the mirror-like shield, he avoided her gaze and struck true. From Medusa's severed head sprang Pegasus, the winged horse. And Perseus, victorious, did not keep his trophy. He gave it to Athena, who placed it on her shield, a reminder of strategy over strength. From warriors, we move now to a figure of impossible burden. Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. Son of Zeus and immortal woman, Heracles was born with strength beyond imagining. But his life was anything but easy. Hera, jealous of Zeus's infidelity, made Heracles' life a trial. Driven to madness by divine wrath, he committed a terrible act. To atone, he was given a path of labor. Not one task, but 12. Each labor was a mountain, and Heracles climbed them all. He faced the Nemean lion, whose hide could not be pierced by weapons. He strangled it with his bare hands. He battled the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads. Each time he cut one off to grow back. With fire and help, he overcame it. He captured the Cyrenian hind, chased the Erymanthian boar, cleaned the Augean stables in a single day, and drove off the man-eating Stymphalian birds. He journeyed farther still, to Crete, to Thrace, to the underworld itself. He fetched the girdle of Hippolyta, stole the cattle of Geryon, brought back the apples of the Hesperides, and captured Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld. Each task tested not only his body, but his resolve. Heracles was not noble in the quiet sense. He raged, stumbled, wept, but he always stood again. In the end, his mortal form could no longer carry the burden, and Zeus welcomed him to Olympus, not as a god of power, but of endurance. Now imagine a darker path, one through shadow and stone, the labyrinth of King Minos. Here lives the tale of Theseus, a prince of Athens who volunteered to enter the labyrinth and slay the Minotaur, a monstrous being, half man, half bull, born of a queen's curse and hidden away beneath the palace of Knossos. Each year, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to be sacrificed to the beast. Theseus, determined to end the suffering, joined the group, but he did not go alone. Princess Ariadne, daughter of Minos, fell in love with him. She gave him a ball of thread. With it, he unraveled the path as he entered, and found his way back after killing the Minotaur. He succeeded. But on the journey home, he left Ariadne behind. Some say he forgot. Others say he feared consequences. Still others say it was fate. The sails on his ship which were supposed to signal his victory, remained black. A mistake that led his father, King Aegeus, to believe him dead. In grief, the king leaped into the sea that now bears his name, the Aegean. Greek heroes rarely found simple endings. There were also quests of vast ambition, like that of Jason and the Argonauts. Jason, seeking to reclaim his rightful throne, was sent on a mission to obtain the Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship, guarded by a serpent in a far-off land. He gathered a crew: Heracles, Orpheus, Castor, Pollux, heroes in their own right. They sailed aboard the Argo, braving harpies, sirens, clashing rocks, and uncertain loyalties. In Colchis, Jason met Medea, a sorceress who helped him succeed, betraying her own father in the process. They fled together, but trust unraveled. Betrayal returned, and in time, tragedy fell upon them both. Greek myth tells us, even those who win lose something. Finally, we come to the wanderer, Odysseus. His story begins after the Trojan War, a conflict sparked by beauty and pride. After years of battle, Odysseus simply wanted to go home. But the journey would take 10 years. 10 years across angry seas and cursed islands, through temptation, loneliness, and despair. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops. He resisted the songs of the sirens, lashed to the mast as their music threatened to pull his ship into the rocks. He faced Scylla and Charybdis, sea monsters that swallowed ships whole. He spent years in the arms of goddesses, Circe, Calypso, but always longed for his wife, Penelope. Back in Ithaca, Penelope waited, weaving and unraveling a funeral shroud to delay her suitors. When Odysseus returned at last, disguised, he proved himself not through force, but cleverness, stringing his old bow and striking true. His story is not about victory. It is about persistence and the long, painful path toward what we love. These myths, Prometheus, Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, Jason, Odysseus, are not about perfection. They are about endurance, consequence, and complexity. The Greeks did not build heroes who always succeeded. They built heroes who stumbled, who paid prices, who questioned gods, and sometimes were punished for it. They remind us that greatness is not about triumph. It is about continuing, one labor, one loss, one uncertain step at a time. So, as your eyes begin to grow heavier, let these ancient paths wander softly in your thoughts. Picture the rustle of leaves in a sacred grove, the hush of oars on quiet water, the flicker of a torch inside stone walls. Imagine a hero walking, not racing, not conquering, just walking towards something or away from something, carrying a story that will one day become a whisper in the dark. The Trojan War, perhaps the most well-known story in all of Greek mythology, is not a tale of a single battle or a sudden clash of swords. It is a slow-burning story, layered with pride and promises, long journeys and deeper wounds. It is not, at its heart, a story of war. It is a story of people, gods, and mortals alike, tangled in desire, loyalty, rage, and loss. A story that begins not on a battlefield, but at a wedding. It is said that all the gods were invited to the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph who shimmered with divinity. All that is, except Eris, goddess of discord. Spurned, she arrived anyway, carrying a golden apple. On it were etched 3 simple, dangerous words: for the fairest. The apple was tossed into the gathering, and 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, to decide which among them deserved it. They turned to a mortal, a shepherd prince of Troy named Paris. He was young, thoughtful, and perhaps not yet hardened by the world. The goddesses appeared before him, not in majesty, but in persuasion. Each offered a gift. Hera promised power, dominion over empires. Athena offered wisdom, the glory of victory in battle. Aphrodite, with a smile, both gentle and dangerous, promised love, the heart of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. That choice would unravel kingdoms. The most beautiful woman was Helen, already queen of Sparta, married to Menelaus. But drawn by Aphrodite's promise, Helen sailed with Paris. Willingly or not, the myths disagree. To Troy, a walled city of wealth, pride, and towering gates. When Menelaus discovered her departure, he did not weep. He gathered kings. His brother, Agamemnon, High King of Mycenae, took command. Odysseus of Ithaca was summoned. Nestor, old and wise, came too. Even Achilles, a young warrior of unmatched skill, was drawn into the cause, though at first he tried to avoid it. The Greeks launched 1,000 ships. They crossed the sea, not for conquest, but for pride, not for love, but for possession. They set foot on Trojan shores, and so began a war that would last 10 years. But time in this war does not move quickly. There are not endless battles, but long pauses, years where little changes, where warriors camp under foreign skies, their lives shaped by waiting. Among the Greeks, Achilles became a figure of awe. He was the son of Thetis, the same sea nymph once denied by Zeus, and had been dipped in the river Styx, granting him invincibility save for the heel by which he was held. He was swift, brutal in battle, but also deeply human. When his war prize, Briseis, was taken by Agamemnon, he withdrew from the fighting, not out of pettiness, but pride. Without him, the Greeks suffered. The Trojans, meanwhile, stood behind high walls. Their prince, Hector, was not only a skilled warrior, but a devoted brother, son, and father. He did not fight for glory. He fought because it was his duty, because Troy was his home. The gods, as always, took sides. Athena aided the Greeks. Apollo favored the Trojans. Zeus tried to remain above it, but even he bent when the scales of fate wavered. One of the most haunting moments came when Achilles, enraged by the death of his dearest friend, Patroclus, returned to the battlefield. Patroclus had entered the fight wearing Achilles' armor to inspire the Greek troops, but was slain by Hector. Achilles, grief-stricken, did not merely seek justice. He sought devastation. He killed Hector in single combat, tied the body to his chariot, and dragged it in circles around the walls of Troy. But even in rage, humanity flickers. Priam, the aged king of Troy and father of Hector, ventured into the Greek camp alone, guided by Hermes. He knelt before Achilles, a man who had killed his son, and begged for the body. Achilles, seeing the grief in Priam's eyes, wept. He returned Hector's body, and for a moment the war paused in mourning. Yet the end had not come. The Greeks, after years of siege, had still not broken Troy's walls. It was Odysseus, clever and cunning, who devised a plan, not of brute force, but of trickery. They built a wooden horse, tall and hollow. Inside, hidden warriors waited. The rest of the Greek army burned their tents and sailed away, or so it seemed. The Trojans, believing the war to be over, brought the horse inside the city as a trophy, a symbol of their survival. That night, as the city slept, the Greeks crept out. The gates were opened. The ships returned. Troy burned. The war was over, but the wounds it left behind would stretch far beyond its ending. Helen returned to Sparta. Some say she was welcomed. Others say she was cursed. Agamemnon returned home to betrayal and death. Odysseus would wander for 10 more years. The war did not end lives. It ended eras. It changed the way Greeks thought about gods and fate, about pride and the price of glory. It marked a shift from myth into reflection, from heroism into tragedy. Even Achilles, the greatest warrior, would not survive. Struck in the heel by Paris, guided by Apollo's hand, he fell. His story ended not in battle, but in the silence that follows it. And Paris, the shepherd who judged the goddesses, would die in the ruins of the city he helped doom. But not all was lost in fire. From the ashes of Troy rose Aeneas, a Trojan prince who would sail westward. His journey, told in Roman tales, would lay the mythic foundation for Rome itself, a new city, born of the fallen one, carrying its memory forward like an ember. Thus, the Trojan War was not just a battle. It was a mirror. It asked, what do we choose when given power? What do we risk when claiming beauty? What do we lose when chasing pride? And perhaps, most of all, how long can a heart carry grief? These are questions that linger, not with swords, but in whispers, in old songs sung at the edge of firelight. So as the war fades behind us and the stars return to their silent watch, you may feel the pull of sleep growing stronger. The battle has ended. The ships have sailed. The gods grow quiet. And all that remains is the sound of the sea, the flicker of a dying fire, and the breath of the world, steady once more. As the dust of Troy settled and the last of the ships slipped beyond the horizon, the world of gods and heroes began to dim. Not all at once, and not with a great crash, but slowly, like embers cooling after a long burning fire. The age of myth did not end with a single moment. It faded gently, like the tide receding from a shore it once ruled. And in its place, something quieter began to emerge. Not divine, but human. Not eternal, but curious. Still, for a time, the gods remained. In the centuries that followed the Trojan War, people continued to pray to Zeus, to burn offerings to Apollo, to whisper the name of Athena beneath the olives. Festivals were held in honor of Demeter, whose grief had once turned the world to winter. Statues of Aphrodite were carved from stone with such tenderness that they seemed to breathe. But the world was changing. Where once every thunderclap was thought to carry a message from Olympus, now it became a subject of study. Where once illness was the wrath of a god or the curse of a nymph, it became a mystery for healers and philosophers. The myths did not disappear. They simply moved from the realm of belief into the realm of memory. In time, new thinkers rose. In the city of Athens, men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle began to ask questions the old stories did not answer. Not because the myths were wrong, but because they no longer satisfied a different kind of hunger. The hunger to understand the world, not through metaphor, but through logic and observation. Still, these same thinkers carried the myths with them. Plato, in his dialogues, often used myth to illustrate moral ideas. Aristotle wrote of drama and tragedy by studying the myths. The fall of Oedipus, the wrath of Medea, the flaw of Agamemnon. The gods, even as they stepped off the altar, were never far from the page. Meanwhile, artists and poets gave them new life. In vases, we see Heracles battling beasts, Odysseus tied to the mast, Dionysus sailing on a ship that blossoms into vines. In temples, we find great friezes, rows of marble figures caught mid-motion, eyes fixed on something distant. In epics, the gods continue to guide, challenge, or abandon their human counterparts. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Hesiod's Theogony, the Homeric hymns, all became the quiet foundation of a culture that no longer expected the gods to intervene, but remembered them anyway. And so, mythology entered a second life, not as belief, but as legacy. Children learned the names of gods as part of their education. Soldiers carried their symbols into battle. Philosophers wrestled with their meanings. And storytellers always returned to them, because the gods were never just beings. They were ideas shaped into faces and names. As the Greek world gave way to the Romans, the myths changed language but not shape. Zeus became Jupiter, Ares became Mars, Aphrodite turned into Venus. The stories remained much the same, slightly polished, a little more structured, but still pulsing with that same blend of wonder and warning. The Romans built roads and aqueducts, laws and cities, but they also built temples to Minerva, Neptune, Juno. They told tales of Aeneas, survivor of Troy, as their founding father. In their empire, the myths were both a connection to the divine and a tool of power. The gods watched not only over the hearth, but over the state. But as centuries passed, something new arrived. Not another god, but another kind of faith. One that spoke of a single, unseen deity. One that replaced many shrines with one altar. Slowly, the temples of Greece fell quiet. Statues were broken or buried. Names faded from prayers. And yet, the stories never truly vanished. They sank into the soil of memory. They slept beneath ruins. They waited in the lines of old books and the corners of old paintings. When the Renaissance bloomed many centuries later, the myths rose again, not as gods, but as symbols. Prometheus became the spirit of rebellion, of scientific defiance, of human progress. Heracles became a symbol of strength and perseverance. Odysseus became the eternal wanderer, still sailing across the seas of human imagination. Artists, poets, and philosophers of the Renaissance and Enlightenment saw in these figures not superstition, but metaphor, timeless reflections of the human soul. In modern times, the influence deepened. In psychology, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung looked to myth to understand the mind. Oedipus, Narcissus, and Electra became names not just of stories, but of patterns within us. Myths were no longer seen only as tales of old. They became maps of our inner lives. In literature, Greek myth appeared everywhere, in novels and poetry, in plays and films. James Joyce reimagined Odysseus wandering Dublin. T.S. Eliot echoed the fragments of myth in his lines. Even comic books and superhero stories borrow the old structure. A powerful figure, marked by fate, tested by trials, guided by gifts. In our cities, we still walk past columns shaped like temples. In our calendars, the planets bear the names of gods. In our language, we speak of Achilles' heels, Midas touches, Pandora's boxes. Even now, even here, you carry them with you. The beauty, you carry them with you. The beauty of these myths, but that they were loved. Not because they explained the world perfectly, but because they helped people feel less alone in it. They offered shape to the chaos. They made the sky personal, the sea emotional, the fire sacred. They gave names to fears, faces to hopes, and voices to longings too deep to speak. Today, in a world of satellites and cities, of algorithms and electric light, we no longer look to Mount Olympus for thunder, but in quiet moments, in stories told to children, in dreams we don't fully understand, in quiet walks under the stars, we still feel their presence. They are not gone. They have simply changed form. Perhaps you've felt it, that subtle echo when you stand at the edge of the sea and sense a depth that ice and tea just water. Or when you wake from a dream of flight and wonder, briefly, if you've touched something ancient. That is myth. Not just the stories, but the way they live in us. And now, as this long night draws to a close, we return to the present, to the quiet of your room, to the breath moving slowly in and out of your body. The myths have carried us far, through chaos and cosmos, war and wisdom, heroes and heartbreak. But they leave us gently where we began, in the stillness. You may sleep now, if you haven't already. And if you dream, let it be of distant mountains, marble temples, olive groves in soft wind, of a voice singing beside a lyre, or of a lone ship sailing into the sun, toward something eternal and endlessly familiar.